Today, we have the privilege of sitting down with Bethany Joy Lenz. Joy rose to fame in the mid-2000s as one of the main stars of the hit TV series One Tree Hill, a show that became an iconic part of television history. In addition to her role as Haley James Scott on One Tree Hill, Joy has also been featured in a bunch of other popular shows. This includes Dexter, CSI, and Grey's Anatomy, in addition to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Shockingly, what many fans did not know was during her entire tenure on One Tree Hill, Joy was secretly involved in a cult. A few months ago, she went public with this experience in what is now a New York Times best-selling memoir, Dinner for Vampires. So in this episode, we dive deep into that experience. We explore the early days of her involvement with the cult, how it gradually took control of every aspect of her life, and why there were so many challenges in breaking free. Prepare to be shocked, outraged, saddened, and everything else in between. So without further ado, Bethany Joy Lenz. Joy, thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been a public figure for a couple decades now. You were a star of One Tree Hill, a major TV show, and you just came out with a memoir, Dinner for Vampires. And so I imagine when people saw this book came out and hear about your story, it was maybe somewhat surprising of like, how could someone that was like a public figure like also secretly be in a cult, and that aspect be surprising? Is that something that you get a lot?
Not particularly. I mean, maybe that's what people are saying, and just not to my face. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I've been asked a lot if I think that's common, particularly in Hollywood, and I think it is. I think there's a lot of artists that are seeking depth and truth, and a life of curiosity is really inherent to an artist. And so that means pushing boundaries and looking at things outside the box. And so I think there's a lot of artists who get involved in high demand situations.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk a lot in the book about like defining a cult or like what a cult is and stuff like that, and how what pops up in people's mind when they hear this stuff. What's interesting is when I researched like what are like the hallmarks or features of a cult, it was literally to a T. Like I read the whole book and then I researched that after. It was like literally to a T, like all the experiences that you had. Like I could just like immediately like pinpoint in the book like what was happening.
Crazy, isn't it? Like these guys that run these men and women actually who are narcissistic and run these sort of high demand situations, and even just abusers in a romantic relationship or a family dynamic, people who are narcissists, it's like they all have the same playbook. I don't know. And what do they have, conventions? I don't understand how they all seem to know how to behave.
So the high demand group, is that like another way of referring to a cult? What does that term mean?
Yeah. Okay. So cult is a term that's not legally admissible in court because it's an undefinable word. It's a word that we use as slang to identify something that is offbeat, like off the normal path of what we in our current Western culture consider to be normal. So what has become admissible in court is something called high demand group, which is identifiable as something that really requires all of you, all of your commitment, all of your time. Everything in your life revolves around this thing, which is still kind of undefinable because anyone who is devout in their faith or religion, I mean, that becomes the cornerstone of your life. Everything in your life bleeds out of what your fundamental beliefs are. So in a way, everyone is, I guess even if you're secular too, because that still means that you have a fundamental set of beliefs about how the world works, and it may not be religious, but it is kind of religious. So in a way, everyone's involved in something that's high demand. And that's what I thought was really interesting about my journey as I came out and the healing. And the more people I talked to, I was like, oh, everyone has a set of beliefs. Everyone is involved in something that's consuming their life to where everything, the way they see the world, the way they interact with other people is flowing out of that central belief system. And it's demanding all of them. So what set of beliefs is going to lead to the most fruit, the most fruition, leads you to look at other people with
For
the
sure.
most love and compassion, all those things. Long-winded answer. But yeah, high demand, it technically is what you can say in court when you're trying to define a cult. But it's all very ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, there was such a slow progression, like a slow progression of how this like unfolded over time, and I think there were so many aspects of the book that were just so relatable to what anybody would get into, in terms of a group and a sense of belonging and stuff like that, and it also like brought to mind to me, about 3 years ago, I think Hulu came out with a documentary about WeWork. Uh,
I
and
haven't seen it yet, but
yeah.
I've heard.
Yeah. But I think one of the executives there said like when they arrived at WeWork, they were like, okay, this is a cult. And so there's just this insider terminology, this culture that developed, and it was started from like a good place of I want to be part of something bigger than myself, and
Yeah.
this movement around we and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then by the time that Adam Newman, the CEO, left in like 2019, he got kicked out. It was like crazy town, like what was happening at WeWork. And now it's completely changed. But I think the idea of a cult or high demand group like can come in all shapes and sizes. And you might not even realize when you get into it, like
Yeah.
what's actually happening.
Well,
So,
you wouldn't. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know anybody that would walk into, it's like, I quote Mark Vincente, who left Nexium, a lot on this, but he said in the documentary, he said in The Vow, nobody just joins a cult. You don't, you join something you think is a good thing. Nobody just signs up like, hey, can't wait for you to screw up my life. This will be fun.
Yeah, there wasn't one moment really, at least like for the whole entire bulk of the book, where I was like, oh, she seems like she's actively knows what she's signing up for right now. It seemed like something that just happened. It
Yeah.
just like flowed. And
Yeah,
so,
it's the nature of coercion.
Yeah.
Anybody who's in a situation where they're being coerced, you don't realize what's happening. And suddenly you find yourself with no real choices. And it's very insidious and slow. It takes time.
yeah. So I wanted to really to really contextualize kind of how bad this got. I wanted to start with the end before going back to the beginning. And so let's travel back to a moment in the book, chapter 26. You're walking into a bank.
Yeah.
Tell me what happened that day.
I was getting a separation from my husband, who I had married the group leader's son. And through him, I had turned over control of my finances in a large way because the relationship was so volatile, and a lot of it revolved around money and how I was spending my money that I was making on this show, and he wasn't making any money. And there was a restaurant that I had bought for everyone to have a job, and there was a hotel that I had invested a significant amount of money in. So I was so tired of arguing about money and just arguing in general, that I thought, okay, if we can remove this piece that's creating so much conflict, if I can just remove that from the equation, the interpersonal relationship with my husband, then we won't fight as much. And that would mean peace. And so I think in my mind, I just sort of justified it like, it's okay. Like, fine, you take it. Take care of the money if it's that important to you.
Yeah.
And so when I walked into the bank, once we decided to get a separation, or I did, I sat down, and we found out very quickly, the teller and I, that all of my money was gone. There was a chunk left that, if I had been able to walk away with just that chunk, it still would have been nothing compared to what I had made, but it was enough that I could have, it would have been easier for me. But all of that money was already committed to debt, short sale on the house. I had to put it toward groceries and rent for the next year or so with my daughter, because I was about to go be a single mom. it was all like, I'm looking at this chunk of money and going, oh my God, that's all going to disappear in the next like 3, 4 months. And lawyers, I mean, the divorce and custody battle itself was um, years. It took years, and it was so expensive. So it was really devastating to find out that while I was trusting these people, my this man that had come in and become sort of a father figure for me, and then became a very literal figure for me when I married his son, and the woman who was a mother figure, and friends that were working with them running finances. They started this like faux business management company. That all of those people had just been stealing from me the whole time. And under the guise of, we're looking out for you, we want what's best for you. It was really devastating. It really affected my ability to trust anyone, because how can you trust that anything anyone's saying is true if you're capable of being that close to someone and having them rip the rug out from under you? It's really tough.
How much did they steal?
$2 million. Yeah.
What do you like tangibly remember, like, or what thoughts were like racing through your head in that moment when you're like reviewing this thing and you realize, like, oh my God, like this is all gone?
It was a bombardment of fear and betrayal. I don't think there was any real rational breakdown of thought until later. And it took years. It took a while to process. I mean, probably months in therapy to like actually sort through what happened. But yeah, I don't know that there was some particular, it was just like my brain was exploding with how unbelievable it was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about the idea of, all the members of the main cast of One Tree Hill had been, had been 9 seasons, and,
Yeah.
Everybody, was being compensated for that. And just you're like almost like to that point, those 9 years, like your life's work, like just, and like the financial aspect of that, like just being like completely flushed down the drain. And I was trying to just like enter into that moment. Like, what would that feel like for like 9 years, and then just feel like it was just like ripped or like stolen from you from a financial aspect? I just can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I write about my inner monologue in the moment in the book, and there's a paragraph about like all the, how my brain was sort of exploding and all the different random thoughts that were coming in. But yeah, it took a long time to untangle, and it still affects my ability to trust.
Yeah. So that's all coming ahead, I think, like 2012, correct?
Yes.
Around 2012, yeah. So One Tree Hill, I just wrapped the 9th and final season, but that actually wasn't the first TV show that you've been on. And so 12 years earlier, you had just moved to New York City,
Yeah.
which we're filming in New York City right now. And you were a series regular on Guiding Light. And so I wanted to just like touch on this time period before you ever joined the cult, because these seemed like really formative years for you. Especially with community and spiritually. And so like, how would you describe that time? You're like 19, you just moved to New York, that time period in your life.
I mean, most 19-year-olds, I think, I like most 19-year-olds, I was very pie in the sky. I had a lot of big dreams. I was living in a city where dreams come true. I was in New York on my own. I had a great job. I had great friends, and everything was my future was all like ahead of me. The world was my oyster. It was a really great time. And living in New York in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were just talking about this earlier. Nobody had cell phones, so people would still sit on the subway and look at each other and talk to each other, or you read your book or your newspaper. But there was a sense of community, and we were all present with each other everybody wasn't down their own rabbit hole all the time, which has changed the city a lot. But anyway, that's beside the point. It was a really magical time. A lot of just people watching, a lot of inspiration, writing. There were artists everywhere. Anywhere you wanted to get inspiration of any kind, you could find it. And it was a great time.
Mm. Yeah, there was this moment that really stuck out to me. Spiritually, you were in a small cafe, and it was raining, and you were drinking orange juice. And so, can you tell me about like what happened for you spiritually at that moment in New York?
I had, and I write about this in detail in the book. But the only way I can explain it is a supernatural encounter with God in a moment when there was nothing at stake. There was no panic. I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't in despair. It was a completely ordinary day. And I encountered something that I couldn't explain and didn't understand why I experienced that until many, many years later, after I actually got out of this group. It started to make sense to me. But it felt like, and knowing that I had had that experience when I came out on the other end of this cult high demand group situation really solidified for me how intentional God is to us and how loved I am in spite of everything that I couldn't process, all my anger, all my frustration about why these terrible things had been allowed to happen to me. I couldn't deny that I was seen and known and loved because of what had happened when I was 19 years old, when there was no reason for me to like imagine something. I wasn't stressed. It was just like I couldn't look back at that and be like, oh, I manufactured that moment because I was in despair. I wasn't. It was just like a random day.
So was it like a message or?
Yeah, you'll read the book. You'll find out about it.
Yeah. So I think that like those types of things could feel, there's a whole wide range of people listening. And so some people might feel more comfortable with like the supernatural or the spiritual or stuff like that. Like how did you like identify like that you were having like a supernatural like experience? I think that's like a big question for people, or even God, or recognizing that something's God or something's not God, or that whole entire dynamic.
I struggled with that a lot when I was young. The idea of how do I know if God's talking to me or putting something on my heart, at this idea that I had or this thought that I have. Is that me? Is that my environment? Is that God? Is it my subconscious? Like what? How do I know? How do I know? I think once I stopped trying to sort through, that's also very ADHD of me. Like I need to know exactly the information. I think once I stopped trying to identify that and allow the basic fundamentals of if something is good, not feels good, but like fundamentally positive, encouraging, gives me peace. Do I feel peace in my body? Those things, whether it's coming from my subconscious, whether it's coming from an idea dropped into my mind from a greater being than me, ultimately, everything good, I believe, comes from God in some form or another. And so I stopped trying to identify it as that. And now I just credit everything that's good to God, and everything that makes me feel bad or not uncomfortable, because sometimes discomfort can be helpful, but negative self-talk, criticism, looking at other people and with this sense of this very New York sense of, oh, you fucking idiot, like all the time, those things are not from God. And so, yeah, I think that made a huge difference for me in being able to allow myself to just give God credit for all the good things that happen and that I feel. And I try and live in that space. But also, I think I just want to say, like, doing that really helped too, because coming out of a super fundamental the evangelical charismatic environments that I come out of, where there's a lot of people who say, God told me this, and God said this, and I just feel like God is saying that this, blah, blah, blah. I gained through this whole experience that I walked through a real reverence for
that statement.
God speaking. Like, that's a big thing to say. So, yeah, like I like to credit the good things that I feel, the positive things that I feel, to God, as I said. But making that statement, God said, God spoke, I have experienced in that one supernatural moment that I mentioned when I was 19, a moment where, for me, unequivocally, God spoke, and that's never happened to me again in my life. I've felt things impressed on my heart. I've felt things, and that I was like, gosh, should I think of that? That's really wild. I can't imagine that thought came from me, but maybe it did. But I don't think that just happens every day. So that's one thing that's been really helpful for me in the transition of my journey, is realizing, like, it's kind of a big deal. Just walk around saying, like, oh, God spoke to me. God said this for you, for me,
I would say, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that
it's overused.
Yeah, I've become, I wouldn't say allergic to that, but I just feel like in some ways, like there is such a high, like you're claiming to hear from the thing that like created it all. And so some people, and I wouldn't even just say in like a church Christian context, I mean, from a new age standpoint or whatever, it's like just treating that so flippantly of like whatever's happening to you, instead of like presenting it in a more cautious way, or even a humble way.
Yeah, humility. That's it. If you're able to just approach it with humility, there's something, I think, so much healthier about that. Just the sheer acknowledgement of human being might be getting it wrong. However,
I think this is
what
what's
I'm
happening.
Feeling,
yeah.
But like, you're the only one who can actually decide if that resonates with you or not.
For sure. Yeah. So that whole thing spiritually is happening in New York. And then the other component, it seemed like, was really retreat, was like community in New York at that time. Yeah.
Yes, I did. I had a great experience. I had lots of different communities in the acting world, the theater world, the in my faith. I was going back and forth between Tim and Kathy Keller's Redeemer Presbyterian and a small, sort of like a living room church that was very familiar to me as someone who'd grown up in an evangelical environment. There were often Wednesday night Bible studies in someone's home. And so it felt very common to me to go. And in New York, there's pastors coming in all the time wanting to start churches. And it felt like we were a part of a church plant back then. I don't know if they actually ended up, that couple, sweet couple from South Africa, I don't know if they built out the church and it became, but it was an actively growing church. Very different from what I ended up in LA, which was really quartered off and like didn't want to grow. Yeah. I didn't want to become a part of society, but I was too far in at that point to realize it. But yeah, in New York, I had a really great group of friends. It felt very healthy and encouraging. And one of the great things I talk about in this book, one of the great things about this pastoral couple that had started a church in their living room, was that they encouraged us to go visit other churches too. It was like, go check out what everybody else is doing. You're going to learn from other pastors, other bodies of believers. Yeah, it's nice to have a community that is consistent, just for the sake of friendship and people knowing you. You don't have to re-explain your life story every single time. But yeah, something that I don't find a lot in Christian churches still.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. The whole, because sometimes there could be like an us versus them type of mentality that's developed. They often, like, no, you're here, you belong to us or whatever. And so I think just,
or even subconscious, the way that people will get up and talk about other churches badly. Well, we're not like all of them. It's like I hear that sometimes when I go visit a church. I'm like, oh, I'm out. I'll see you in the lobby. I'm getting coffee.
So, I mean, the way that you contrast Los Angeles and New York, I thought was interesting. Did you feel was it devastating for you to initially leave New York and go to Los Angeles?
I hated it. I was so sad to leave New York. I mean, again, I was young. I felt very hopeful and excited about new adventures. So I just had a positive spin on it and was like, well, I need to make some money. There's a lot more TV work, which is faster, easier money. Exactly what a 19-year-old would think. Um, in LA. So I should just go out there and pick up some guest spots and I had always had good luck in LA. So there was a backlog of experience there that I was relying on. But I I was really sad to leave New York. I missed it. I mean I still miss it in a lot of ways.
How did you feel about like you talked about Hollywood and you wrote that you were sensitive to the underlying ego and darkness, like just of that entire scene. And so like what was your perspective on Hollywood at that point?
I I guess my perspective coming at that age out of the church environments that I had come out of was that I it was my job to be like a missionary in Hollywood. I was going to save everybody. So I approached things from that perspective, but I was also really battling with my desire to I was an artist. And so this all of these rules and restrictions that had been put in place, my expectations around what Christians should or should not do, and then trying to also be just a wild and free artist, it really did not it didn't work. It was tough.
Mm,
Um, but that's also because the version of faith that I understood at that point, there wasn't a lot of faith involved. It was just follow all the rules. Here's all the rules that you follow, and then you'll be doing everything right.
yeah.
So
How do you feel about Hollywood today?
I love Hollywood. I love artists. I mean, I think the business of it sucks. I have plenty of opinions about
The
a
way
lot of
things work,
network
yeah.
executives and, how long it takes for anything to get done. And now with the advent of all the robots involved, I mean, I think the quality of what is produced seems to have gone down largely. But at the heart of it, the heart of storytelling, of artists, of people who want to make the world a better place, we're trying to create empathy. That's what storytellers do. The whole reason you tell a story is so that somebody else can imagine themselves in a situation that they never have been in or never would be in. And if you tell it well enough, somebody can really experience that. And then they see the world in a new way and they could be kind to someone that maybe they had judged before.
Mm,
So the heart of storytelling for me is just the most beautiful thing in the world.
yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, I mean the whole backdrop of that of New York and community and the supernatural experience and your experience with faith in God, and then you moved to Los Angeles. Um, I guess you were when I was just reading the book, it seemed like you were in a very innocent state of like when you were entering this group, you were looking for a community in Los Angeles, and you talked about how the cult leader who you call Les in the book essentially saw you as quote unquote like a sure thing, I guess maybe even like low hanging fruit. And so, why do you think that is? Like, what was your mindset right before you got into all this that made you, I guess, vulnerable to him?
So I was young. I had a very pie in the sky idea of faith. I really just thought, uh, I just need somebody to tell me the right way to live. I was desperate to not make mistakes. I was desperate for family and connection. I didn't have a big family growing up, not just my immediate, but our extended family lived in like 2 hours away or in another state. And so we had moved around a lot, and I just wanted some stability and that feeling of home that I didn't experience a lot when I was younger. Um, so that was just my particular Achilles heel, much like a woman who maybe gets involved in a relationship with somebody that reminds her of her dad because her dad was emotionally unavailable. And so she's attracted to somebody who provides her with this sense of like, oh, I'm getting from this guy what I didn't get from
For
my
sure.
father. It's very Freudian, but then the guy turns out to be narcissistic and abusive. And then, but she's stuck because she wants the affection that she's getting outside of the abuse, which is still involved in the abuse. But anyway, so we're all seeking attachment. That was my version of attachment that I was looking for. And it unfortunately matched quite well with Les's abilities, what he could provide, what his sort of natural inclinations were for providing. He had a big family. He was very boisterous. He was very self-effacing and sweet and very like sort of cuddly, you know, like a Papa Bear vibe. And that's what I had been craving. So it was, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting you use the word attachment. We've, studied and talked about attachment theory a lot. And just the whole science behind that and kind of the idea that, your past experiences, whether that's with, formative experience growing up with your parents, and also maybe romantic figures early in your life or whatever, and then creating maybe a more of an anxious relation to other people or even avoidant. And so I feel like that plays a lot of part in predicting the types of things that we're drawn to or the relationships that we seek out as adults.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that, I mean, I know there's all kinds of theories about that, and philosophers and therapists have been hypothesizing on that for a long time. Is there actual science behind it? Like, have you discovered anything in terms of like neural pathways firing off?
Well, attachment theory, it was originally come up with by John Bowlby, I think in the late 1940s. And then it was basically just identified. And then there was this whole thing called the strain situation. It was like an experiment that they did, which has now been replicated like tons and tons and tons of times. So it's kind of established science, but the idea that when we come out of the womb that, we all need love, and that we can either securely attach to our caregivers, or if that doesn't happen, it would be anxiously attached to them or avoidantly attached. And even when you look at the dating scene, you see these patterns develop in how people relate to each other, or there could be a mix between anxious and avoidant attachment. So those are like the main attachment styles within psychology. And so, I mean,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to learn more about that.
So if someone, is going to pick up your book or listening to this and they're concerned with like, what if I'm vulnerable? What if I could be vulnerable to a group? Like, what would you say to those people?
You are. I mean, we all are. We've all got, nobody's perfect. We've all got blind spots. I would say that there's a measure of self-reflection that is important when we think about what in our lives we value to such a degree. Like, where are the gaps where you'd be willing to turn a blind eye to something? I think everyone is susceptible because everybody has core unmet needs somewhere. And so wherever you're trying to fill that void, that's going to be almost from a survival instinct place. Like, it's not that you're naive or stupid. I guess it's an attachment. Like we crave healthy attachments. I was just thinking about this the other day. So I put it into words, which is, if something in your reality were based on bad or limited information, what personal fear or unmet need might block you from seeing the truth? So for anybody who is looking to fill an unmet need, there's going to be some personal fear that blocks you from being able to see negative dangers that are coming at you. So it's important to be able to prioritize where that need is getting met.
Mm. No, I think that no, I think that's really, really powerful. Actually, I think the whole idea of like an unmet need is just, I mean, because we all have those.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that applies to everyone, and the lengths in which that we would go to meet that need could vary for people. I mean, we were talking about it online. I mean, online earlier about the idea, like, do you feel like there are people or leaders that are just like kind of like circling like vultures, like trying to like identify those like unmet needs and then prey on them? Like, did you feel like that was the case for you?
So I don't think, okay, so as an actor, when you play a villain,
Yeah.
the idea is you're not supposed to twist your mustache. You're not supposed to it's very caricature-y and cartoonish to play this sort of like, haha, I'm out to get everyone. I don't think anybody lives in that space. I would be surprised. I'm not one of those people, so I don't know. But certainly in my own life, the places where I'm deceiving myself about my behavior, which I'm sure still exists, as it does with all of us, I don't believe that I don't think I'm being manipulative. I don't think I'm being harmful in any way. But there's got to be places in my life where I've justified things for the sake of my own survival and to meet the unmet need in different places. So I would imagine that narcissists and sociopaths have the same justification in their own mind throughout a series of experiences in life that have led them to believe that they are justified in whatever their behavior is. In some way, they must believe that they're doing something. The ends justifies the means.
Yeah, I was really struck by your ability to empathize in the book with other members that were in. I mean, you're writing about this whole experience, and it's your experience, and it's your life. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like in some ways that is the full circle of trauma. In some ways, it's like to be able to go through an entire experience and then heal from it to some extent, and then be able to look at other members that were involved in that experience, or even potentially have inflict pain on you, and be like, oh, well, you know, they had reasons, or they had a story behind how they ended up in that place.
Yeah.
Which I think was important, because, you know, you could create a world where it's like, oh, we're good, and like all these people are bad over here. Yeah. And so, yeah, I was just struck by that ability.
I just don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think everything's as black and white as that. Like, I think we're all susceptible to becoming monsters. It's in all of us. It's the Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, that's
just the right circumstances.
We all have the capability under the right circumstances. Yeah, exactly. And it's again, that core unmet need. I'm sure that people who are running groups like this and any other kind of abuser has had their own enough life experiences where they've got small moments here and there where they just compromise on a little bit out of that survival mechanism. It's like, if you're starving, how long before you're willing to eat the guy that died next to you? Like,
yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
it's
like real basic survival. How far are you willing to go to keep your self-preservation? And I think that's like a really valuable thing to think about.
Yeah, it's about the circumstances that you've been exposed to, and that's not everybody hasn't been exposed to the same circumstances. Right. Even if you think about something like, I don't know, just take fame, for example, right? And someone who entered into music or film or whatever, very humble beginning, they could become a whole different person when they're like mega famous. Yeah. That wasn't where they started.
Totally.
But like, even, you know, you're talking about the system of Hollywood, or you're going through a certain, you know, thing in your life could just change you in profound ways.
It does, absolutely. What a terrible thing to be in a position where nobody's willing to tell you the truth because they're getting something out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody just kisses your ass all the time and just gives you whatever you want and tells you whatever you want. You literally cannot trust anyone around you because everybody's getting something. And if they're honest with you, you might not be their friend anymore. You might not want to work with them anymore. You might say something negative about them that would affect their reputation. So everybody just pretends. How horrible. How do you find anyone to trust? Or you just really believe that you're great. That you're that great.
Yeah. That's really good.
It's tough.
Yeah, I mean that word trust, because you know, in those early days we were talking about like trying to meet a need, and even maybe this idea of like belonging and like who can I trust? Like you're navigating Hollywood, you know. So like what was those initial days like, initial gatherings, and like what initially drew you into this group of like, oh, this is a safe space of people that I could trust?
It felt very well at first, and I think it's important to note for my group, and although some people do enter into cults that are already established, like a Scientology or the people that would come into NXIVM once it was already, pretty well underway. And I think there's all different reasons why people are susceptible to that. And I might have been as well. Mine happened to be more of just a group of friends at first. But there was a really malignant personality involved in the group that was a mother figure. And I think if this pastor from another state, if he had not gotten involved, I suspect that the group would have either fallen apart or this malignant mother figure would have been exposed, or there was enough honesty and people really seeking real growth and real relationship that I just don't think she was a powerful enough personality to have really taken over the way that Les did. So there was something, bad. There was a bad seed in it from the beginning, but it wasn't until he came in that things really started to shift. So we had a good 6 to 12 months of just real friendship. And it was just young Hollywood professionals getting to know each other, sharing faith, reading the Bible, talking about what we thought, researching. There were some super smart people in the group who were really well versed on authors like Tolstoy and C.S. Lewis, and we would dive into the original Greek terminology and what the words meant. And so there was this sort of very cerebral experience that was happening, while also I felt like, oh my gosh, I can be so open and honest, and I can be weird and insecure, and nobody's I trust these people. Nobody's kissing my ass, like I was just talking about in Hollywood, which was happening all the time. As a young actor, you show up somewhere and there's just very few people who are willing to just be totally honest with you. And so I felt like I was flailing all the time and never knowing if I was doing things right or not, or if I was really neurotic and ADHD undiagnosed at the time. And so I probably behaved in ways that were odd, and it got perceived, because I'm an actor, as being difficult or being like snobby or something. Meanwhile, my brain's just like quirky and weird. And when I would get with this group of friends, everybody seemed to just get it, and they were cool and laughed at me and helped me laugh at myself, and it was great. And and so because my guard was down and all of our guards were really down with each other, and I think it was in a pretty healthy way, that when Les came in, he was a pastor from another state who had been invited to just come speak. He came in and saw all of these really vulnerable, open, wide-eyed, generous young people who were artists who wanted to think outside the box. And whatever his own unmet need mechanisms were, they attached to us from a leeching perspective, which is why the book is called Dinner for Vampires, because that's sort of what we all became for him and a few of the other narcissistic figures in leadership.
You mentioned the word, you wrote that group was the highlight of your week. And you also mentioned the word unconditional love that you felt from the group.
Yeah.
So why was that in the early days, especially the unconditional love thing?
Because most of my life had been performative, performative in church, do the right things, and everybody likes you. Ask questions, question things, ask the wrong kinds of questions, experiment with life, experiment with yourself, experiment with your relationships, be willing to be messy. You're veering off God's path. Don't do it. So stay in line. Or be on stage, say the lines, here's your blocking, here's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
We love you as long as you are doing your job. So there was performative, everything in my behavior and in my life felt like in order to get love, I have to be performing the correct things, the correct ways. And when I started meeting with these friends in this Bible study environment on Saturdays, it was just the first time I really felt like I could be me. I could be weird. I could be, I could say the wrong things. I could curse. I could ask questions that I was previously not encouraged to ask. I could be a mess. I could cry. I could be sensitive. I could get offended. I could get my feelings hurt and share it, and then be met with love and understanding. And well, let's talk about it. Let's work it out. Or like, hey, I just have to tell you, Joy, when you said this the other day, it kind of really hurt my feelings. Be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Thank you for giving me the chance. Thank you for trusting me and giving me the opportunity to apologize. Most people will just, it's not worth it. I don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be vulnerable. So this openness and vulnerability, talk about attractiveness for artists. I mean, that's what we're doing. We get on stage or on a set and we rip our hearts open and, lay it out on the table for everyone. So to experience that in a real life setting with real stakes, it was so satisfying. It felt great.
I mean, I feel like everybody's looking for that. I mean, that's like deep down, especially
I think that's what family is supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's kind of like the end destination for people, especially if you're moving to a place like New York or LA and you're trying to find your community or your tribe or whatever. And to land on that in some ways feels like just like a jackpot of like having those types of relationships. And so you mentioned you had that initial period and then, there's this arrival of this figure Les who ends up becoming the leader. It really brought to question in my mind, you said there was this other malignant figure that was part of this group. Do you feel like you were being groomed and who was grooming you in that case? And so what I mean by that really is, was this a situation where everybody did not know where this was going, except for a select few? Or was it like a calculated move where most people were involved? Like, what do you feel like was happening with like the leaders of this thing and what their intentions were? Or was it just like an organic thing that just happened?
I think it's like planting a weed next to a crop. It's just going to grow into it. I don't know that there was an intention to... I don't think there was a cognizant intention to control and manipulate and steal. I think, and again, that's why I say that it's people who are villains in stories they're not there generally premeditated twisting their mustaches. Like everybody believes there's some greater purpose that they're serving. And that could be anything, like anything that you believe is going to be for some greater good. That's what manifest destiny is. I mean, that's what happened when the colonists came over here and massacred the Native Americans. Like, it's better overall if we just, massacre them so this can be a Christian nation rather than just trying to like work with the people. Like, no, it's manifest destiny. This is what ultimately God wants. And so we must make that happen. And I think it's the same. The top notes are the same of whatever happened in the leadership people, whatever happened in their childhood and their nature versus nurture and all that shit. They came to a place in their life where they believed they had the answers for how people could best live their life. And they had this group of young people that they thought, we can help guide and shepherd these people. And yeah, I mean, I guess the money that's coming in and the cash for the restaurant, like, let's not deposit that. Let's just keep it let's pocket it, and we'll so at least we don't have to play along with the government and their taxes and all of that nonsense. We're gonna pocket it and keep it for ourselves because we'll be able to disperse it better into the community than the government will. And it's every single little thing that you just manipulate and skew and justify and come up with reasons for. If that makes sense.
No, that makes no.
Salad, but
No. That makes total sense. I feel like the whole idea of like this is what God wants type of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, that's like the ultimate trump card. I mean, if like the creator of the universe wants this to happen, and that was one of I mentioned the whole research thing about the hallmarks of a cult. The idea of like having special knowledge.
Yeah.
Like you have this special divine knowledge that nobody else has of what needs to happen. And I noticed that like so consistently as soon as the arrival of his figure happened. Really it's like the weaponization of God in some ways. And yeah, what are you going to do if someone's being like, well, I'm hearing from this thing and like you trust them and you feel like they have good intentions and it's very unsuspecting in the beginning. What do you think, like early on, the primary ways that manifested from him specifically, the whole God dynamic? I'm hearing from God and let's do this type of thing.
In the beginning, and I write about this in the book, it manifests in a manner of encouragement. Any two-bit psychic on the street could, like any snake oil salesman can look at some. And we were so young, so we didn't have the maturity and wisdom to recognize what was going on, but anybody could have looked at any one of us and known a very general amount about our lives and our desires and said, for me, it was constantly feeling like I was in second place, like I just wasn't quite good enough. I could never quite measure up, no matter how hard I tried. And it was all over me. I mean, I wear my heart on my sleeve anyway. And he, I think, was just able to pick up on that very easily but would say it to me in a way that felt very revelatory. And I just want you to know, like, God sees who you are and you're not second place. And you're not, so he had a way of harnessing, like finding language for the things I was feeling that I didn't know how to express because he was 25 years older than all of us and could, it's just a skill that's gained, I think, with life. So he was able to just put language to it. And that felt shocking to me because I was so young and I didn't have language for how I felt. So it felt like, oh yeah, God, he really sees me and God's really speaking to him.
Yeah. How did that, we were talking about the whole idea about like having reverence for God's voice or whatever, hearing something like seeing something supernatural. How did him coming in being like, oh, I'm so connected, I'm so spiritually connected. How did that like make you feel about your own ability to discern God?
Totally inadequate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt a great chasm between my ability to hear, feel, and experience God and the leadership's ability to hear, feel, and experience God. And it made me in that perceived awareness of the chasm, it made me rely on the leadership in the group more because I thought they're so far ahead of me. They're so far advanced. I need to learn from them because how else am I ever going to hear from God properly? Nobody ever taught me how, but they'll teach me how.
Yeah, one of the things that the manipulation things that I picked up on was the phrasing of sentences.
Mm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of leading questions, I would say. And so what I mean by that is like it'll start out by like, "Oh, don't you think?" or "Wouldn't you say?" Right? And so the leading question aspect of it, what that really does is like you're wanting this to move in a particular direction, but you're still wanting that person to feel like they're in control.
Yes,
And
that's
so it
right.
feels like it's your decision being made,
Yeah,
but really he's manipulating you into that.
that's it.
And I honestly, the example that stuck out to me most, since talking about the whole spiritual thing, was manipulating you into handing over spiritual authority to him.
Mhm.
And, you know, can you share about that? Because I thought that it was just like such a prime example of like, he wasn't like immediately like, I'm your spiritual authority, like bow to me. Like it was very, I don't know,
It was
such a
coercive.
strategic, yeah, such
Yeah,
a strategic way of getting you to do that.
that's right. Yeah, it was very strategic. And and bizarrely, I think it was sort of subconsciously strategic. I think like he had that malignant tumor of manipulation had developed so well in him that everything that outpoured from this man was from that. I don't think he had even had to think hard about it at all or strategize. I think it just was an overflow. Um, so he started to communicate with us about the concept of spiritual authority, which several of us had never heard of outside of um, a few verses in the Bible where there's a prophet who is like a mentor. It's really like mentor language in the Bible, and he was using that as interpreting that for us as we should be over you, almost the way I guess I'm not Catholic, so I might be getting this wrong, but I guess almost the way a priest or like the
Mm,
cardinal or like a pope or
yeah.
somebody is over you, where there's this sort of intermediary between you and God, and there's somebody else that you need to be running things by and confirming things with and checking with before you make decisions or think, follow down a trail of thought or yeah, anything really. So being young and not having a huge frame of reference and not a lot of experience with theology at the time, I was like, okay, is that's what mentors do, I guess. You
Mm,
just, I mean, I didn't know, like nobody taught me. I guess that's what mentors do. You just run everything by them and they confirm for you whether or not what you're feeling is from God or not. And so that's how I'm going to learn to hear from God. I'm going to be taught like a mentor. Okay, I guess that makes sense. It's another example of something that is a counterfeit to something that's healthy. Like it is healthy to have a mentor. It's great to have
yeah. There's all these like there was all these counterpoints of the book. I'm like, it's just. I mean, my wife was reading it, and the word that she used to describe was she just was like infuriated by like reading it because there are healthy. Almost every point of the book, there's like a healthy counterpoint of that,
yeah,
and just the subtle manipulation that's happening,
yeah.
you know, and how that could subtly just cause you to place trust in someone that they have good intentions for you and all that stuff. And then, there's a period where you're like, okay, this trust this person and like they're gonna do right by me, and like it just makes sense that these
Yes.
things, right? And
And by
yeah,
then the love bombing phase has been fully put in place. And so I had this whole backlog of experience of him just saying really positive things and encouraging me and all this stuff that felt so good for months. So when he finally introduced something that was a harder message, I was totally willing to accept it because I had already felt so loved
mm,
throughout the rest of the process.
yeah. I mean, the spiritual authority thing. So you quoted him saying, "Someone with spiritual authority in your life, has cautioned you against something, but you ignored them. And he was saying that's rebelling against the authority of God in your life.
Right.
And so I'm like, wow, that's like the most direct statement. It's like, okay, so if I caution you against something, then you rebel, like you're rebelling against God. And simultaneously, he's kind of positioning himself as the safe space of like the fallback, like I always got your back, like I'm communicating.
He's the Moses. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that was just so he positions himself like that, and then he says manipulation is happening all around us. And so it's like, I'm so safe, but you go out in the world and so he's manipulating you, but then he says everything around you is the manipulation that's happening. And I was just like, wow, this is like very, very cunning, like the way that these things are phrased. And again, there is a counterpart to it. Like we just talked about Hollywood, like, I've talked with people that are in the acting scene there, and they talk about how like they feel like someone always wants to get something from you and whatever. And so like there's like just subtle little points of truth that ended up like controlling your entire life, which is just wild to me. So
piece by piece, bit by bit, takes time.
One of those things that he seemed to perceive to pose as a threat was like, and this develops like your own family. And so can you tell me a little bit about that, how this whole thing affected your relationship with family and what he was telling you about them?
Yeah, that was when things really started to turn, was when he had gained our trust enough to be able to start planting seeds about the people that were in our lives that we were close to outside of the group. So it didn't have to just be family members. It could also be close friends or, your best friend from high school or whatever. And that's the isolation phase that is key to any narcissistic relationship, is the isolation. And so that's how that started to become introduced was, again, it was very slow things that were just planting little seeds of doubt at first. I wrote about a conversation I had with my dad once that I was like asking God what I should wear that day. Young, trying to be really open, think outside the box, like be willing to do weird, crazy things. You know what I'm going to do? Like, what if God wants to be in control of every aspect of my life and that's how I'll be the best vessel for God's love in the world, right? Thinking this is a good thing. This is like how I'm going to be the most useful for love. So let's boil it down to the simplest daily activities. Getting dressed. Like, what if there's somebody out there who God said, you're going to meet a girl in a purple dress today and she's going to whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then that's how they'll know. And so I'm like, okay, God, what do you want me to wear? Because I don't want to miss it. It's a lot of pressure. And I'm talking to my dad about this, and he's like, you're asking God what you are supposed to wear? He's like, I'm not understanding this. Like you have agency. Like there is a freedom of free will. God is big enough to it's a relationship. You are you and God is God, and he interacts with you. He's not trying to be you or live your life for you. And I couldn't hear it. I couldn't understand what he was saying. And so I went to Les to explain this situation with my dad. And his comment was essentially, you can't cast pearls before swine. He's not going to understand because he's living in an old, restrictive narrative, religious. It's a religious mindset, Joy, that's restrictive. And so I love your dad, such a smart guy. Like, what a cool guy. But I don't know that he's as vulnerable and open as you are, the way you see God, the way you see the world. And so you may just have to expect that he's always going to misunderstand. And so the things that God's revealing to you, you want to be careful and you want to be protective around those things so that you don't get hit with all these arrows of doubt. To a 20-year-old mind, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And so I start trusting my dad less and less, sharing with him less and less the things that and my dad and I used to talk all the time about God and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. And it was like those little things just started to plant the seeds of doubt. And same with my mom. And then it moved on to other friends that I had outside the group. Oh, they're just not going to understand. And eventually you find yourself with a very small circle of people that you trust.
Mm. Yeah. On that front, you wrote that it was like a methodical plan to distance you from your loved one. So it seemed like there was intention there that was happening, you feel like?
Yes, but again, I don't think it was an intention like he sat down and mapped out, here's what I'm going to do. I think he really believed his own bullshit. Like, I think that tumor had grown, that weed had grown so wildly inside of him that everything he did was an overflow of him at an early age, I would imagine, not recognizing and cutting off the weed.
Mm.
Much like all of us are susceptible to becoming the monster. We're all susceptible to becoming Jekyll.
Yeah.
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I always mix that up. We're all susceptible to becoming Mr. Hyde. And there's a personal vigilance and a humility that's required, I think, on a daily basis to not let that happen.
Mm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So they came up with a term for your biological family versus what they were. Can you share what that was?
Oh, yeah. Biofamily. Biofamily were the people that brought you into the world and that you were connected to by blood. But this earth is temporary. The spirit is eternal. And so your spiritual family, that's who really matters.
Mm.
And who's your spiritual family, Joy? Mm.
Which is the leading question again. Yeah, I mean, so and you could see a kernel of truth in that. So if someone had a terrible experience in their childhood, you know, you could argue that a mentor or even a group of friends or something like that might be like a healthy, safe space for them.
Yeah.
But you know, that subtle division that was being made, and it seemed like this was not unique to you, but like it was happening to multiple
Absolutely
different members of the group. And so as that was all happening, it seemed like there was like these set of rules that were being like developed like within the group of like things that we do and don't do. And then can you explain to me like the ones that stuck out the most was like the dynamics between men and women. Like, can you explain what those rules were that you were to adhere to?
That became one of the biggest undercurrents in the whole group, was this differentiation between the roles of men and women and how men were designed to be warriors, be protectors, be the head of the household, make all the decisions, essentially. And women were not. Women were made to help out, but I mean, we served a supportive purpose. Again, it's a slow burn. Like if somebody just came right out and said that, and actually that was something that was said early on, but it wasn't by Les. It was by one of the other leaders' wives, and I didn't know her as well. And it would just kind of, she said like, you know, if you were married, your husband would be the head of your household and blah, blah, blah. And I was like itchy about it. It always made me uncomfortable. But once I did get married, it was, they were very heavy handed about insisting. And it's probably why there was so much tumult in my marriage, because they were heavy handed about insisting that I be this submissive wife. And I was fighting it with everything inside of me. Like, no, I have an identity. I have ideas. I'm smart. I know what's going on. I'm capable of making decisions. There was an idea that there's this spirit, this sort of dark female spirit that's trying to destroy men. And that we had to be really careful not to succumb to that. And that's when it starts just getting so crazy. But again, you know, you're so far in at that point.
Yeah.
That the crazy got to a point where they didn't have to mask it as much anymore. It didn't have to be subtle, because at that point the stakes were so high to leave and to question it. If you started questioning things, you might risk losing all of your best friends and your whole life and your whole construct of identity. So it's easier to just believe the crazy thing than to possibly lose everything.
No, I mean, some of that concept is not unusual for the church, but like what stuck out to me was like this, it seemed to violate even like the most tame version of, I mean, the most extreme version of that in the church. And so there was like so many things that were absurd that were like being said. Like, are there things that pop up in your mind of like the most absurd things you were told about gender dynamics? Or
I think it's what I was told, not in so many words. There were some people in the group who were susceptible at different levels for different reasons for different things than me. And so there was sort of a maneuvering that I think the leadership, and Les in particular, had to do, is like keeping track of manipulating a lot of different people. I don't know how it did it. It sounds exhausting to me. But there were some people who were told things overtly, like a woman who was upset with her husband, who had become he had formulated an addiction to pornography, and she said, it was her fiance, she said, I don't want to marry him until this addiction is dealt with. Like, he needs to therapy, he needs to like recover from this. And she was told in no uncertain terms, that's not your place to say. Like, that's his journey, and you're as a wife, you don't get to have authority over your husband and say like what he is and is not going to be.
it's so strange.
Right? Okay, so but I wasn't told that. She had a different relationship to her independence at that time than I did, in different ways. So for me, if that had been overtly said to me, I don't know that there would have been much that could have convinced me to believe it. I think I probably would have said, that's batshit crazy. No fucking way. Which she said about other things that I was fine with. So, who knows? But for me, it was more of the subtle stuff. It couldn't have been said outright to me. I think also because of my neurodivergence, I'm very black and white, and I like take things very literally. Mm-hmm. So it had to be performed. So my ex punching holes in walls, throwing cell phones, like throwing things across the room, and then we would talk about it in our marriage counseling session with his dad. And it was a slap on the wrist for him. And then it would turn around and be all about my inability to understand how much he loves me and how his frustration, he doesn't have anywhere else to put it. What else is he supposed to do with all of this anger over the fact that I won't receive love? And when it's put in that context, it's like nobody ever said outright, it's totally fine for him to throw things across the room and punch holes in walls. That's fine. Nobody said that, but it was like, come on now. That's not how we need to behave. You got to find a healthier outlet for your anger, but joy. And then it was an hour on me. So it's the subconscious, not subconscious. It's the subliminal messages that I was getting from the behavior more than the words. To answer your question.
What do you feel like the long-term consequences for you and for other members of the group, especially for women being subjected to this type of ideology about gender dynamics?
It's a great question. I don't know what it's been for anybody else. Actually should call some of these girls, some of the girls that left the group, and ask them how it's affected their relationships. Because I can say that it's affected my relationships in the sense that it's made me probably more stubborn than I need to be, less collaborative than I need to be in a romantic relationship, because I think there's probably still this sort of like clawing animal inside of me that's like, don't put me on the offensive. Like, don't try and put me in a box and tell me that I'm needs to be agreeable to you. And again, it's like there's the counterfeit and there's the healthy version of a collaborative relationship where both people are respected and uh, it's okay to let your guard down. And I still have a hard time with that. It's like it's still a trigger.
What do you think? What do you think the healthy version of gender dynamics is now on the other side?
I think that is something probably best categorized by each individual and their relationship with each other and with God, and where they feel the most whole, healthy, most collaborative, how their thoughts and behavior are best serving the relationship, if the relationship is its own entity that has like a purpose in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know that I've thought enough about it to be able to intelligently identify that, but I will.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about like, so up until this point, we're talking about a lot of what's happening in your private life. And so you have this public life. And so people are familiar with that public life, but they weren't aware of the private life. So let's talk about the public life. You know, you land the role on One Tree Hill, and that, you know, catapults fame, and that ends up becoming one of the more successful TV shows in history. Did you know initially how significant that role would end up being?
No, I had no idea. We didn't even know the show was a hit until I think it was season 2. We went to TRL at MTV in New York, and we were like, what is going on? The streets are filled with people holding up One Tree Hill signs. We were in Wilmington, just being a bunch of bratty kids running around, eating, you know, the Waffle House during the hurricanes and just hanging out. So yeah, we'd really no idea.
Do you feel like it was hard to, like, how did you manage those two things? Like, so you moved from, you know, LA, and then you were kind of taking trips to the Pacific Northwest, and then you moved to Wilmington. Like, how did you manage this group, this cult, like, and then this newfound fame? Like, was that a weird thing to juggle versus how it was previously?
No, in fact, being somebody who was used to being performative, wanted to do all the right things, seeking nobility in life, it was a really perfect setup for the leadership to talk to me about the noble way to approach fame, which is to shy away from it. And what better way to shy away from it than to have your little hideaway up here in the Pacific Northwest? Don't go to LA. Don't be working on other jobs. You're already gone 9 months out of the year. You know, you can hide away up here in this little town, and you won't have people surrounding you, kissing your ass and manipulating you. So this is going to be the best place for your character growth as a human being, where you can actually trust the people around you, because look what fame does to people. You don't want that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've noticed about Hollywood in general and roles is like, it feels like, I don't know if you feel this way, but it feels like a runaway train. And what I mean by that is, like, once you hit it big with one thing, then the interest around you seems to
you're sexy,
amplify.
everybody wants you.
Like Glenn Powell right now is like a great example of that. Like, he did Top Gun, whatever, and now it's just like a stream of roles. And so, you know, did you find that to be true? Was that like was there a lot of commotion at that point, like in terms of opportunities and stuff for you that was happening because of the role in Montreal?
There were a lot of opportunities, a lot of huge auditions that I had struggled to get before. I was known and liked by a lot of casting directors, but as you say, there's a attractiveness to momentum, and I often felt like I would get really close on a role and then just couldn't cross the finish line, because generally the role would go to somebody who was more well known. And there was a little window of time when One Tree Hill was super popular, when that momentum was surrounding me, and I totally could have taken advantage of it, but I didn't. Again, with the nobility, like, this idea of like, you can't outgive God. If God's giving you momentum now, just turn it back over as a sacrifice. Like, give it back to God the way that you would tithe your money when God gives you money. Like, put it back into the church and feed the homeless or whatever. Um, uh, there was this sense of if you sacrifice what's being given to you, God will be proud of that and be proud of you and will only give you more, because then you could be trusted. It's so manipulative.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the more devastating aspects of the book. I mean, everybody has to make a decision on life about the path that they want to take. And so, like, if you're on the show and you're presented with the opportunities, and then it seemed in some ways that the stunting of your career, trying to hijack your career, was a very tangible thing that was happening with the cult.
Yeah.
And maybe for some people there is a decision of like, hey, I don't want to take this opportunity or whatever, but like, it felt like your autonomy from that, and that it was your decision, was stripped. And so one opportunity was like the lead of Belle on Beauty and the Beast. And can you share what happened there? Because I felt like that was just such a tangible example of that.
Yeah, I had been auditioning for years, probably since I was about 16, for Belle. And I would get close. I'd get callbacks and I would get close, but they were sort of stunt casting at the time, and they would bring in pop stars and just more famous people. And then when One Tree Hill was doing really well, I was in that bracket, and so they were like, "Come on back, we'd love to see you again." And I went in and I read and I won the part, and I was cast. I got Belle in Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. It was my dream role. It was like the only thing I desperately wanted to do for years. And I was a musical theater kid, so I never really wanted to go into TV and film. It was sort of once I started, I really enjoyed it and I fell in love with that. But my heart at the beginning of my exploration into entertainment was musical theater. So that's all I really wanted to do. And I got this part. It was like the actual dream of my life come true. And as I said, there was a big campaign from Les and the leadership in the group to keep me in the Pacific Northwest and keep me noble and keep me humble. And I had just been on a 35-city tour with Gavin DeGraw and Michelle Branch and Tyler Hilton, and we were on a tour bus and playing music all over the country. And I was having a great time. I was trying to, in spite of all the drama going on, trying to pull me back to Idaho. And it was like, hey, you've been gone for so long and we miss you and we're worried about you and your character development and your faith, and just come back home, spend a summer here. We'll really focus in on your character development, and you can go play Broadway another time, but like it's probably going to be better for you as a person. We don't want you straying too far from God. And when you introduce that, you threaten someone with their like eternal life.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. It's a trump card, yeah.
Yeah, it's the ultimate trump card. It's like, you might be falling away from God. Like, you're susceptible, Joy. Don't be so proud to think that you're not susceptible to being misled. And if you go work in Broadway and go off and you've been away from home for so long, then, the devil might get you.
Well, why do you feel like they didn't want you to take it? Because there's this moment in the book that I remember. So there was like, you had a constant stream of communication with them, but then they just like, this role came up and then they like ghosted you and like wasn't answering calls or whatever. So why do you feel like they were so strong about not taking the role?
I think other people in the group who weren't answering my calls. I mean, Les was an expert at triangulation. And so anytime there was something that he didn't like or felt disloyal about, that was disloyal toward him, anytime something like that was going on, he would begin to triangulate. He would make phone calls to people. Hey, just pray for so-and-so. Like, I don't know what's going on, but, feels like there's this independence that we're battling with right now and blah, blah, blah. And so, then you start to kind of distance yourself from that person, and you don't trust them as much until they're back into a right place with God and alignment. So I think he was doing a lot of that, which is why probably a lot of my friends in the group weren't responding to me or answering my calls. And then I think he just wanted me to stick around because I had money, and I, being a well-known public figure at the time, gave their ministry credibility. I'm doing that in quotations for you who are just listening. Ministry. It gave them a credibility so that he could use my name as cachet when he went to talk to investors for whatever new cockamamie business he was trying to come up with. So, yeah, it was just control and finances. Pretty simple, I think.
The other thing that really stuck out is like so you're in this group. What were like fellow cast members, directors, agents, like word about like what's happening behind the scene? What was going on there, and how did that affect your career?
I think at some point the rumor just started, like she's in a cult. At first it was, I don't know, she's very religious. She's super conservative and religious. And then it was like, oh, I think this is like actually worse than that. This is really, she just doesn't, she's not friends with anybody else outside of the people in this group. And then once you have that label on you, it was part of the reason why even the cover of my book is kind of campy on purpose, because I wanted to create this sense of levity around the idea of cults, so that for people who find themselves involved in something like this, there's less shame, and it's easier to get out of something when you don't feel shame around the possibility of leaving and thinking, oh my God, everybody's going to think I'm an idiot. The cult label back then was, I think, really damaging for my career. I know there were a lot of opportunities that went away because it was just too much. Like, there's already enough to deal with in life and on sets and financial dynamics and people who are insurable and not insurable. What kind of cult is it? Like, is she going to show up on set? Is it going to be some weird, like, will she say certain things? Will she not do certain, like, what's it? It created too many variables, unpredictable variables that would have affected possibly production. And at that point, you just go, let's just find somebody who's not. Yeah, she's good, but like, let's find somebody else who's just as good. So yeah, I mean, back then the word cult and that stigma was really rough, and hopefully we're coming out of that more and more now. So people will be less shamed by moments that they've fallen into things, manipulative situations in their life, and hopefully avoid it. And the leaders and the narcissists and the people who get involved in starting and developing groups like this will have less and less opportunities because more and more people won't be so intimidated and scared by the word
cult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like people to this point who have been listening to this, there's a very tangible feeling of like the emotional and spiritual manipulation and control that was exerted over you. But, to tie back into the beginning, I feel like the last piece of the puzzle of control was the financial piece. As they say in tennis, it felt like a game, set, match type of thing, where it was like, so you moved your money from this kind of prestigious financial institution in New York that was managing your money from the show, to this new firm, quote unquote, quotes, that the cult leader Les had set up. And so you had just gotten married at this point to his son, which is a crazy, insane story in itself. And just going to leave that as a bit of a cliffhanger so people could read about it in the book. But if you set that aside, that you had just gotten married, right? So getting married doesn't automatically mean that you're going to like sign up with a new financial management firm. Like, you could just have your own little thing going on. So why at that point did you feel comfortable moving the money?
I was trying to be a good wife according to what I had been taught for most of my life about, again, getting into these out of context, modern fundamentalist Christian ideals of gender roles and relationships, I had always understood that unity in a marriage meant everything was together, everything. And I didn't have healthy relationships modeled for me. I mean, my parents didn't know what they were doing. They were trying to figure it out too, and they didn't have healthy relationships modeled for them. So there was a lineage there of people not knowing what they were doing. And I only was going off of what I'd heard in youth group and random pastors in different churches talking about things, or overhearing wives talking about whatever at Bible study. I mean, you just pick up on little things throughout life. So I thought, oh, unity means you just merge everything. So we'll just merge our finances, which there was nothing to, I mean, he didn't make any money, so there's nothing to merge. But his name was put on everything. And I thought it was a really grand, noble gesture of partnership.
Yeah.
And when his dad and Les and the mother figure of the group, Pam, and then another member of the group who was older and in a leadership position, all decided to form a business management company because there were so many businesses that were being thought of and created and invested in. And they wanted to keep it all in the family. They wanted to, we'll just keep all the money here so we can keep track of it. It'll be so much easier. Again, I was 4.5 years in by that point, maybe 5 years into the group at that point.
Yeah.
I was pretty well manipulated, and it just made the most sense. Like, okay, you guys want to be in charge of the money? Like, go ahead. We're fighting all the time anyway. If this will take one thing off of our plate in terms of what we're going to be arguing about on a daily basis, great. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider the trust and belonging piece in that, like, it doesn't sound so crazy if you feel like these people have your best interests. Do you believe, like, right away that they'd started stealing money initially?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, there was, in the book, I mean, there were hints of this, and, there was a whole, gambling story around the people gambling your money. And so, like, when, in the time leading up to the thing with the bank and going to the bank and seeing the money was missing, like, did you have any feeling in the back of your mind of, like, that this was happening, or did that end up just being a complete shock to you?
It was a total shock. I really, they were banking on the fact that I'm dyscalculic. I have a hard time with numbers. They kind of blur together and move around. I can't remember them very well. I got really intimidated with sitting down and talking about meetings where we'd go over income and then expenses and how taxes worked and how percentages worked. And it is not my strong suit. And they banked on that, pardon the pun, that I was not going to know what was going on. And I didn't. They would sit down with me. They would scribble some stuff out on, like, a yellow legal pad. Occasionally they printed out a P&L, and I would look at it, and my brain would kind of fog over, and I'd be like, yeah, I guess that looks fine. That makes sense. Okay, sure. But I didn't even know what I didn't know. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't even know I had a retirement account. Like, this is something my mom had been paying into since I became a working actor at 12. My SAG union retirement account. And I just had no idea because I was never in charge of my money. It went from my mom to this company in New York. They took care of everything. They paid all my bills, electric bills, like everything. So then when I moved it over to the new group, Triad, I just sent it back over to them. Like, no idea.
Yeah.
Which became actually a huge sore spot in the divorce because the judge had ordered me to you have to do discoveries in a divorce where you turn over paperwork, or they give you paperwork to your lawyer and you have to fill out like everything about your life, every bank account, every therapist, everything you've ever done, where all your assets are, all of that stuff. So you have to fill out this whole form. And I didn't include a retirement account because I didn't know that I had one. And when we turned in the paperwork, and then but they knew because they were running it. So when their lawyer said, well, why isn't her retirement account on this paperwork? The judge looked at me and I was like, I have a retirement account. He's like, you don't know. And he for sure, like 100% thought I was just lying through my teeth. Like I had no idea.
Yeah.
I was like, what, how do I explain? Yeah. That was frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, we're using the word cult, but I feel like a lot of these things that are happening could just happen in a relationship or something like that, in the sense
For
that,
sure.
yeah, we talked about the isolation piece before, but then the other thing with people who are trying to manipulate you, or, the extension with the cult piece, is it seemed like the silencing of like discontent or suppressing discontent or like any criticism or complaining or questioning, like immediately gets like nipped in the butt.
Yeah.
And it seemed like there was just so many different examples of even members of the group, voicing concerns about this or that, and then just like quickly it being glazed over. And so even the situation with the money, it's like always having an answer, always having a, rebuttal to things. I think the thing that felt most devastating to me when I was coming across the story was the gaslighting. The gaslighting seemed to be one of the worst things, was like, labeling women in the group as, I don't know, bipolar or crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Because they brought up something or complaint or concern. Do you have any, thoughts on that whole piece of this entire thing? Is that like, feels like you don't even have a fighter's chance if like you're voicing complaint or criticism, then gets shot down like immediately?
Yeah. It's really insidious. It's always a slow burn, but yeah, the gaslighting was a huge part of it.
Were there any moments that, like, with members in the group, whether it happened to you or somebody else, that it just really rubbed you the wrong way, of being like, okay, this is like really going the wrong direction because of the way they treated this person?
Yeah, I think I started to become aware of it when there was a couple in the group that had been, actually, one thing I didn't include in the book was that Les's wife, Marty, earlier on had started visiting another church. Like, she just didn't want to go to their church, like the church her husband pastored. She was like, I kind of want to go somewhere else. So she started going to another church on Sundays. And I, being the young, wild, free spirit that I was, though that side of my personality anyway, I was like, that's cool. Like, good for her. But there was so much heaviness around it. And he was always like, we got to pray for my wife. She just is like rebelling. She's rebelling against like the unity in our marriage. And I don't know what else to do. And so it created this narrative of like, she's out, she's bad. And it rubbed me the wrong way, but it was also, that was early on, and I still getting to know everyone. And so I didn't, when you go to like somebody's house for the first time, you don't just walk into their kitchen, open the fridge. It takes a few times of getting to know somebody before you do that. So it was one of those things I felt just kind of like, oh, I'll just leave it hands off. I'm sure there's a dynamic I don't understand. I'm not married. What do I know? But then later, there was a couple who wanted to start going to a different church. Again, they had been exploring going to Catholic church like a couple times a month, and then they decided they wanted to become Eastern Orthodox. And they sent out a long letter to everybody, like letting us know about this journey and why they felt theologically that being a part of the original church was where God wanted them to be. I was like, okay, like I'm not here to tell you what you're hearing from God and what you're not. Like, great. If you want to go there, like, you're still one of my best friends. We've been really close for 10 years. No problem. And that's not how it went down. I mean, they became vilified. They became vilified very quickly. And I got on board with it at first, also because of my husband was adamant that they were really out of line and they were betraying everybody. And like, They had promised to be a part of this family forever, and now they're leaving. And I was living in North Carolina still. I was like, maybe there's more to this than I see. Okay, I'll go along with what everybody's agreeing with. But it really only took a couple of weeks before I was finally like, actually, this just feels bad. These are my best friends. I don't know what to tell you, but like, I don't care where they go to church. And that was a huge turning point for me also in just the unraveling of starting to see what was going on and that we were being gaslit. We were being manipulated.
Mm.
But yeah, it didn't all happen at once. It was a slow burn.
So obviously you're not in the group now. And there's a whole wild sequence of you leaving the group and that people can read about in the group. What did you, at the end of it, what did you end up learning about the group and Les and the past of the group and stuff like that?
Well, that is a huge piece in the book that I think is worth preserving the surprise of, the anticipation of, because there is so much that was going on behind the scenes that I didn't know, especially because I was living in North Carolina for 9 months out of the year. So, and because the book really is such a slow burn of it's like, it's not a thriller, but it's kind of terrifying. I don't want to give away, I don't want to give away that part of it.
I think that what might be surprising to people, and you mentioned this in the beginning, but it seems like you still have, faith, spirituality.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would think after being through such a tumultuous experience, like how could you even still be in that place? And so what do you feel like the lowest point spiritually was for you in this entire journey, and where did it go from there?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about this before and it's in the book too. The time when I got out and I lived in LA, I had my own apartment with my daughter and was just trying to sort through the aftermath and really allowed myself to get angry with God and acknowledge that I was angry. Again, being raised in the religious environment that I had, there was not, and there still isn't, I don't think, a lot of healthy exploration of anger in the church. I think there's an expectation that, if you become a Christian, then that's your life just becomes, you just have joy now. You're able to forgive, you have peace, you have, and it's such bullshit. Like there is no love without anger. How can I love you and have something bad happen to you and not be angry with what happened with the person that caused you pain? If I love you, I'm going to be angry that something harmful happened to you. And there has to, anger has to have it's a natural human emotion. It has to have a place to exist. It's not meant to be squashed. Now, that doesn't mean that you're supposed to just let it out and hurt everybody because you're acting out and you're frustrated, but there's such a lack of exploration in that in the church. Anyway, I didn't know what to do with it. I just knew that me living inauthentically, but doing all the right things, quote unquote, right things, led me to total destruction. So I really didn't have anything to lose at that point. I became very angry with God. I didn't know, and again, because of what had happened when I was 19, it was the only way that I actually I couldn't convince myself that God didn't exist and that it was all just a giant con, because I had this experience that I couldn't explain, and it didn't make sense for me to say I was under stress when I was 19 and I manufactured that because I believed in God and I wanted God to be real. I couldn't say any of that rationally. And I was trying to be as logical and rational as possible, and absolutely willing to look at any option, any answer. I was like, it has to make the most sense. And so I started to approach my faith from that place. I got really angry with God. I said, I'm not going to believe anything that I've been taught anymore. I will believe that you exist, you see me, and you know me, because you encountered me once, and I know that you did, and I can't deny that. So that's the baseline. That's all I have. And from that point forward, I went on a journey over the next, I guess, 10 years. I'm still on it. Of faith through logic and reason. And not everything can be guaranteed. It takes faith to drive your car. You have faith in the other people on the road that you're not going to get, run over. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But sorry, I have a dark sense of humor.
No.
Cannibalism, getting run over. It's great, Joy. I became very insistent that I live extremely authentically. Whatever I was feeling, whatever I wanted to say, whatever I wanted to do, I was going to live authentically. And I didn't mean selfishly. I just meant like real, as in touch as I could be with what I actually felt, believed, wanted. And my prayer or request to the God that I knew was out there in some forms, in some way, was, clearly you're capable of speaking to me in a way that I can hear you. So you're just going to have to hit me over the head with stuff. I'm not going to try and navigate, am I hearing from God? Am I not? I'm like, I can't do that anymore. So you have to make it abundantly clear to me in any moment that I'm veering into territory where I'm going to be messing up my life in some way that's not part of a good plan for me or something. And otherwise, I'm just going to drive. I'm just going to roll through, and we'll see what happens. So my life kind of became an experiment of being willing to just be messy and fall on my face and hurt myself and hurt other people and apologize for it and learn how to forgive myself. And that authenticity was the key, the absolute key to a new understanding and a relationship with God. That was nothing like I had ever experienced before. There were no rules and restrictions and everything being black and white and this angry God who's like waiting for you to screw up. And it was like, I experienced grace. I experienced peace. Real humility. I mean, still working on that. And that's the only way that I've been able to learn to trust again in small ways. Some big ways, but I couldn't just go through my life like, okay, well, I don't trust anybody anymore. That doesn't work.
Yeah. I think a lot of people need to like get real with, whatever it is that they believe in, and come face to face with whatever it is that they believe. And I appreciate the logic and reason part of it. Because sometimes things are just a visceral, emotional reaction to things. And then other times it's like people's belief system has been just handed to them or told to them from other people.
Yeah.
And so there's a real value in going on in that journey. And I do love the anger piece as well, because if that's how you feel, if you're actually angry, then like suppressing that and like glossing over that, even if you were to go into therapy and say, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my anger, like it's going to come out eventually.
Yeah. And also, like, is God not big enough to handle your anger?
Yeah.
Like, why are you afraid to just be angry? Be angry with God. Like, he could take it.
So what do those angry things look like for you? What were you saying?
I was screaming. I was saying, fuck you. I was like, how dare you? I did live like the best life I ever could have lived. I did everything right. And you allowed this to happen to me? Like, you destroyed my life? Okay, you didn't destroy my life. You allowed my life to be destroyed. Still, I did everything right. Like I thought that was the deal. Like I do the right things and you give me a happy life and I get to be one of the chosen people who is righteous. Like it's just not how it works. That is the commercialized version of Christianity that has been sold to so many of us, and it's not real. That is not what the gospel is.
Why do you, on this other side, why do you feel like, God let you go through that and just lets us go through things in general like that?
So this is where faith and reason intersect for me. I don't, and this is actually something I got from Tim Keller, who pastored that church I went to when I was in New York in the 90s. I don't know why God allows suffering in the way that he does. And I say he because that's, I guess, the term I'm most comfortable with. I think God is probably an it or a they. Maybe it's three. It's three. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to say he. I don't know why he allows suffering, but I do know that the reason is not because he doesn't love us. Because if you take the Christ story into the center of you, this story of a man who prays for people who persecute him, prays for people who are harming him and hurting him, loves them anyway. If that is the foundation of how you see the world and how you look at other people, there's no, and then sacrificed himself for that. Like a God that actually is, I think it's the only religion where God actually comes here. And he came here and then sacrificed himself. So to me, I can't say you allow me to suffer because you don't love me. That can't be the answer. And so while I don't know that the question of why I was allowed to suffer will ever be able to be answered, other than I'm experiencing a huge amount of redemption right now, which is beautiful, and hopefully this story will help a lot of people. And my daughter exists. And I mean, there's so many beautiful things that came out of it. There's a lot of people that suffer a lot worse than I have. But I know that we're loved in the midst of that. And that love is what overflows and what can continue to make the world a better place.
Yeah. What would you say to people who were already skeptical on the faith spirituality thing, and your experience is something that makes them even more cautious of like, oh, I don't want to visit this thing.
Great. Again, like if you, how do I explain this? Words. Authenticity is the only way. You're not going to get anywhere by trying to behave or do things in a way that doesn't feel authentic to you. If you authentically feel disconnected from any kind of greater being, you have no desire for a connection with it. You fundamentally don't believe that exists. And there's no part of you that has a desire for it even to exist. If it did, go be authentic. Like do what you need. God is so big. He is capable of communicating with you in the time that you need to be communicated with, in the way that you need to be communicated with. So if there is a God out there, nothing's going to be forced on you. You're not going to be forced to go believe something that you don't want to. Don't believe it. Just, I would say that probably the most authentic thing for humanity is to be open to possibility. And if you're open to the possibility, which I think we have to be, look at science, all the things we thought we knew 100 years ago and the way that things have unfolded now. And we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we thought the world was flat, all that stuff. there are so many examples of that. There are so many things that we think we know, and then we grow up and we get new levels of understanding. So be authentic to who you are, where you are, and be open to new information.
Mm.
And don't have anything where the stakes are so high that if you learn new information, you're unwilling to accept it because it might cause you to sacrifice something that's filling an unmet need.
That's really good.
Yeah.
One of the last questions I have is, I think it's interesting as people process the whole story and then, get the book. There's people that are naturally sympathetic towards trauma or experiences that people go through. And then there's like this whole other part of the population, like the personal responsibility population. What would you say to people who would try to, diminish an experience like yours, or, even, blame it on you, or like, oh, you just went along with this the whole time. I felt like that was an important thing to like get to.
Yeah. Thanks. There's a couple things, I carried a lot of personal responsibility for this for a long time. It fed a part of my humanity that wanted to feel prideful, wanted to feel better than other people. I think it's a pretty natural thing for us to feel. It feels very caveman. Anthropologically, we want to sort ourselves into categories, and we want to be better than the other tribe, and we want to, situate ourselves. And I think that being a part of something that I believed made me feel a little superior to other people was feeding me. And, so I lived with this sense of, oh my God, my pride led me into this and it kept me there and all this stuff. I am reconciling that now with some really great new information that I received from Dr. Ramani. I don't know if you know who she is. Yeah, she's brilliant. Have you guys talked with her yet?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you should have her on. I was sharing this with her, and she said, you're really hard on yourself. This is not how coercion works, especially when you're that young. You don't... personal responsibility comes when you have a choice, and you made a choice that was harmful. If you don't have a choice, it's coercion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's hard. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of gray areas. That's why it's very difficult in family court to deal with narcissists, because the judges are like, I just need to see like physical evidence of things, and I can't, you can't prove emotional abuse. There's nuance to coercion, and so I'm wrestling with what parts I need to forgive myself for, and what parts are just that I was just a victim of coercion and what happened to me, but I don't want to just be a victim. I don't want to live in that mindset.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't know. I'm still wrestling with that. But I guess anybody can think whatever they want. But I also would say that might be pertinent to realize that if you are telling someone who experienced coercion, manipulation, and gaslighting that they are stupid and naive and shouldn't have done those things, and that you're really just asking them to believe your experience of what your perspective is of them over their own experience.
That's really good.
So it's kind of a self-defeating argument, because then you're just asking them to do the same thing with you that they already did, that you're condemning them for doing with somebody else. So
that's really good.
Yeah,
I think that's really good.
Hamster wheel.
Well, I mean, we've been talking for a while, and I think we've only scratched the surface on the story. There's still so much in the book, so many shocking turns and twists. And like I said offline, I think the entire book was really like a masterpiece, incredibly well written.
Thank you.
So go out and buy it, Dinner for Vampires. It's now a New York Times bestseller.
Thank you.
So
and the audiobook too. The audiobook is doing really well, and I narrate that. So if you or any of your listeners are not readers that sit down, and I have a hard time with my attention span sitting down and reading, but I love an audiobook, and so that also may be enjoyable.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll put the link in the description.
Thank you.
Below.
Thank you so much. Great questions. It was really nice dialogue today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, you got it.